What's going on, everybody? Welcome to tonight's episode on the Paranormal Council. So, if you like and love discussions, in depth discussions about everything paranormal related, then keep watching this show. And we have a big announcement. We're going to jump right into it. Folks, so as promised, the big announcement is going to be that we are officially going to be also airing on Paraflix. What is Paraflix, you say? Well, you're in luck because I'm going to tell you. Paraflix is a streaming platform that is nothing but paranormal, pretty much. And look, they have a little bit of everything. You like documentaries, shows like ghost hunting shows, other podcasts, you name it. It's paranormal related, and I'm telling you, and it's like dirt cheap a month. I don't know the exact cost anymore because I don't keep up with it. I let you guys go see it, but go get it. And we don't have our promo code yet, so if you want to wait till we get a promo code, that's fine. Um, but we will have a promo code for you that you'll be able to get a discount. But it's not very expensive, so go get it anyways. But tonight we're going to be talking about life after death. This is a little bit of a continuation from the previous episode. And by the way, if you're watching this on Paraflix, this is going to be probably about episode number 3. We just couldn't. We just had to wait to announce things till we got some official stuff. So, just letting you know in case you're confused. But no, this is a continuation of the reincarnation discussion that we had last week. We just thought we would get into some more in depth part of some things and theories of what happens when you die. So, as always, we have the esteemed panel here. So, I am excited to get started. Guys, life after death. Let's tackle this one tonight and let's hear some theories, some ideas. Let's dive into it. So, first thing I will start us off by saying death, we're all going to get there. So, some of us more than others, or faster than others, right? And so, I've always looked at, and I even wrote about it in my book, shameless plug, but I've talked about two major types of death: expected and unexpected. And to clarify, expected death is those that are usually have enough time to know that their time is coming, usually terminally ill, cancer patients, those type of things when they reach that point and they know that things are coming versus the sudden death when you don't know what's coming. That can affect some things possibly. So let's get into it. Who wants to jump in first?
I went first last week, so somebody else this week.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember all the stuff because last week we had a great discussion after we got off the podcast about all kinds of different things related to this subject. Um, there's a lot of discussion about near death experiences. And one of the parts that I work with the most with working with clients is how that seems to somehow affect an opening up, a communication level, an understanding level, um, more paranormal experiences, ability. It seems very, very common whenever you have a significant trauma. So, like a near death experience or a significant accident, it happens all the time and people talk about it. Pretty much everybody in the paranormal field has some story of some significant trauma at some point in their life, even if it was when they were a small child and they don't even maybe remember it. Which I thought that was fascinating too, because you could just walk up to anybody and be like, "Hey, what's your story?" And they've got one.
Okay.
Um, I don't know. I don't know if it changes the path necessarily, or if it's just a momentary jump into the other side. Some people completely get there, some people don't, according to their interpretations when they are conscious here again. But I don't know. That's a good thing for us to talk about.
Well,
Yeah.
it
universally across all religions, when they have when you become initiated into whatever religion it is, or you achieve a certain level, there is a death and a rebirth ritual involved. Christianity has the born again thing, where you literally, they drown you in water and then they resurrect you out of the pool. That whole thing of death and rebirth is a ritual that goes all the way back to the ancient Egyptians. The whole idea of dying and coming back is a point of enlightenment. It's basically forced enlightenment. Even in the Bible with Lazarus, Jesus was really kind of pissed that people were still performing that ritual, and it ended up in the death of Lazarus, and he had to be essentially resurrected from Jesus himself, because he'd been in the tomb for 3 days. He had to be pulled out. That
Yeah, you gotta
ritual,
remember the passage where it said Jesus was pissed.
yeah. Well,
Just kidding.
you can infer it from his
Yeah.
tone on what he's talking about, that he was not pleased with the whole idea that that ritual was still taking place, because it's an ancient ritual, and he, every religion has a version of that in order to achieve enlightenment, to achieve the authority of spiritual atonement. Um, Nobody really knows what happens when you die. A lot of people will say they know, but nobody really knows except for the dead. And they're really kind of coy about the whole thing of what is actually taking place. You'll get bits and pieces in seances, or, various, trance rituals, trance states. They'll talk about what's going on, but it's not really something that we can relate to very easily. They're kind of coy about exactly what happens, because it's not universal for whatever reason. Everybody has a different experience when they cross over. So the
Yeah,
afterlife itself is kind of a mystery.
all right. Well, let me focus this a little bit more too, and then since Sean said he went first, I'm going to make him go last. So I want to talk about. Let's start kind of as in let's look at the approach of when people know they're going to die. Okay, so let's just kind of picture maybe some elderly folks that are at the end of their time, and the reason why I bring that up is because I do think it does matter a little bit. Okay, and what I mean by that is, so when you look at and you talk to or read stories and talk to people that's been in hospice, people around, and of course probably, and some of you all have been around. I think all of us here probably have been around somebody that was there, or we've been there at their passing. Um, but I've seen and read a lot of different reports about people that knew they were going to die. They were toward the end, and as far out as even 2 weeks before they actually passed, they started to see either relatives or what they said were maybe angels, um, but familiar people that would start visiting them.
Hmm.
Okay. And then as you get closer to the end, there's been reports about how people at the day right before they pass, sometimes they will talk about hearing music. They will sometimes talk about seeing the room filled with people now. Now they're seeing like a welcoming party. Um, and there sometimes is light, you know, even the living that were there in the present sometimes said they experienced that there was sort of a sudden shift in light, and it got a little brighter for a second, and then the person was passed. Um, so I want to kind of touch in on a little bit of that, because when you start combining those stories and the commonalities, right? I try to look at the common things, right? The pattern recognition, and then you start getting into the NDEs, right? There's a ton of people that did clinically die and then come back. Okay. And there is quite a few that talk about a white light. They talk about, kind of gravitational pull. We can get into like NDEs. That's probably a whole nother episode, I think, sometimes. Um, but if you kind of look at those, try to piece together both stories and kind of see what happens maybe at that crossover point, to me, and this is just my theory, I feel like the white light, that everybody sees, or not everybody, but a majority of people, they talk about the white light and they're like, don't go into the white light, but it's pulling me. No, stay away from the white light. I personally think, obviously, the white light, I believe, is a portal. We already know that there's portals that go up to places, right? So I think it's a portal to the next place, which is, again, whatever your beliefs, who knows. But it could be a staging ground. You might go to the place where it's like a waiting area and you're waiting to be judged, or you could be greeted by people. Who knows? Okay. But that's the portal that will take you there. Okay. And I believe there is a gravitational pull. There is a slight gravitational pull to it. I think that's to assist when people pass, because guess what? You no longer have physical movements. You don't know how to walk physically. Okay. You're now energy, or you're a spirit, right? So that gravitational pull helps to assist and pull that spirit, that spirit body into the portal. Okay. I also believe, based on all these stories, that the welcoming parties is preparation for those people. And it's a welcoming party. It really literally is just that. It's loved ones, or possibly angels. There may be some people that don't have a lot of loved ones, that they even recognize or something. Some people have a very lonely life here. And so, and not all their relatives maybe went to a good place. So again, there's a welcoming party, I think, and they are also there to assist that spirit in that transition into the light. So that's one thing that I believe, just based on a lot of the stories, the also the NDEs in a way, with what they talk about. But it just seems to kind of make sense. So that's kind of where I'll leave the discussion. That way, I'll give you guys some things to get in there. Sean, you want to jump in there now?
Oh man, there's a lot of things but all y'all talked about. I want to give a personal story real quick. You hit something at the very beginning of that. This is very personal, so it's about me and my father. Um, I was I actually hired my father. We worked in the same place, and he lost his job. I hired him, and very rarely had 2 days off in the same time, but we did. And he called me one afternoon and said, "Hey, you off tomorrow?" I said, "Sure." So let's go down to the creek. So we went down to the creek, and I picked him up, and he said, "Let's go to the top of the hill. So there's a graveyard up there." It's like, okay. And he was very solemn that day, and very reflective that day. And so we get to the top of the hill, and it's a beautiful spot. I mean, it's just beautiful. There's an old Indian burial ground not far from the regular place. And he says, this is a good, quiet place. I think I want to be buried here. And so 2 weeks later, my dad passed away suddenly. And everybody in the family was, we was caught off guard. I was at work, and they called me. And one of the very first things my mom said was, "I have no clue where to bury him." And I was like, "No, I do." And so I think, I don't know if he knew anything, but that day was a very different day. I recognized it, and I even recognized it that day that he passed. I was like, there was something going on there.
Right.
And so I think that happens. I've been in situations to where people have, obviously, as a pastor, I don't know how many people I've actually sat with as they passed and went on. There's a lot. Death is sacred, as I said last time, and it's a very important moment in One other thing I'll kind of just jump off on that is talking about the white light. And I'm kind of like you. I think that it's not a necessarily heaven or hell issue. I think it is more of a portal, more of a situation. Obviously, as a Christian, I'm going to believe that God has a process in place. You know, I talked about this with several people. Luke chapter 16, verse 19, we see that the angels escorted the folks to where they were going to go. Um, and so I think there is an assist. And obviously, as a Christian, I believe the Bible tells us as to be, as we pass, to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. So in that, I do believe that there is a plan put in place by God. But I think that there's also, as we kind of talked about last week with the reincarnation, I'll just throw this out there. I think there's a lot more that happens in this process, and there's not always the solid time frame. I think that there's a lot of in betweens here that we could talk about, and we've discussed this last time. But I think there's a lot of in betweens here that we don't understand or know.
Yeah. And I would even venture to say, too, like with your father's passing, I would still put him in that category of expected, passing, because I think he did know, and he probably was being prepped, and it was just in a way, and he
Mhm.
probably was one of those men. Maybe you can testify to it, that he was probably one of those men that probably just didn't share those things that he was experiencing in those last few weeks with anybody, because he didn't want to probably burden his family. He didn't want anybody to be sort of down on it, and he kind of took it himself. And obviously, with the part of sharing
Mm.
his plan with you is like for his resting place. But
Mhm.
beyond that, he probably kept everything, and wanted to carry that burden for the family.
Well, it's odd. The very last words, we left my son with him the night he died. I left my son with him and my mom. We were going to be gone that night. The very last words he said is, "I got something important to tell you tomorrow. You're busy, but I'm going to talk to you about it tomorrow." And I've always wondered what that important thing was. I don't personally. I don't think he was expecting the death. I think he was planning some things. I knew in the background he was planning, and he was. I kind of knew what he's going to talk to me about, but I don't know for sure. So, but
Right.
with that, I do think though people are prepped. I mean, and whether they know it or not, they're prepped.
Right.
Um, so, and either way, I knew that he was in the hands of God, and I knew that he made his peace. He made what he needed to do, and it was just in other people I saw. He was talking about the ideas of seeing people. I've seen people smile as they go in. I've seen people cringe. I've seen all kinds of reaction going into that state. So it's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Well, there
Yeah.
are famous people that have publicly said, when they were about to die. Abraham
Mm.
Lincoln, for one, he had a premonition in a dream of his own funeral in the White House. He put that in his journal, and he told a lot of people about it. And 3 days later, he was, there. There's also Mark Twain. Mark Twain famously said, with Halley's Comet, he was born when Halley's Comet went by, and he says, I came with the comet, I'll go out with the comet. And the moment the comet was at its apex crossing Earth, Mark Twain died. So, I
Mm.
mean, he somehow knew that the comet itself was the marker of his lifetime.
Yeah. Well, and that's always an interesting thing. Again, I think there is something in some people that, and whether that's preparation for your death or just you know precognition or something, like a different kind of ability. Who knows? But I also want to say as well that we're going to talk a little bit too about unexpected and what may happen with that. But I wanted to give Jen a chance to chime in on like a little bit of what we were talking about with people that were sort of facing death.
Yeah. I mean, I've been there for both expected and unexpected. And, I definitely agree that, whether we realize it or not, there is preparation, right? And I know some people will talk about, their guides, some will talk about the Holy Spirit, some will talk about angels. To me, they're kind of all the same thing, but under a different name. So, like for me, the Holy Spirit obviously is part of God, and angels do God's work and are his messengers. And just like the Holy Spirit can speak to us, and guides, I've heard so many people say my guides, but they're also saying angels, right? So it seems to be like it's one of those things where everybody's talking about the same thing just in a slightly different way, or acknowledging it a little differently. Um, but when someone expects their death, they are definitely prepared. A lot of times I've heard people talk about dreams that they've had and they didn't understand it, especially when they've been sick and maybe didn't know it and then come home on hospice a short time later. They'll talk about dreams that they had or how they thought they were going crazy because they thought they had a visit from a family member, or um, how they had, for some reason that they can't explain, all of a sudden they decided that it was time to clean out that safe and go through everything, or make a list of who gets what. And and they're like, I didn't know why I was doing it, but now I'm home on hospice and I know why. And they're like, but I don't know how I did that. How did I know that? um so Sean was saying that death is sacred, and it is. It absolutely is. And I think that with anything that is sacred, truly sacred, right, there is um, a togetherness in it. Not all sacred things are done alone or meant to be alone. Uh, they take work and preparation and a lot of self-sacrifice. One of the things that I noticed a lot in people that I was with when they expected it was there was a lot of self-sacrifice in the way that they thought, in the preparation for leaving, um, in putting aside their own different things like that. So I think that I agree completely that there's a lot of preparation that goes into this stuff. With near death experiences, not so much, but a lot of times after the fact, you hear um, about people who have had a dream, a premonition, or had a new thought process and a new perspective show up, or reestablished an old relationship, and they didn't know why. Like why it would just seem weird timing to them. But then this near death experience happens, and now they know why. So even in near death experiences, I think there's a lot of preparation and togetherness as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and so one thing I want to also talk about too is the white light. I know we talked about it in how we think it's a portal. There is pushback from some of the non-believers, and they say that out of all the NDE stories, that the white light is actually a very small percentage of people that's actually reported it. However, they go into the scientific explanation of why there is a white light. However, I do not buy the scientific explanation because if it was scientific, then it would be repeated every time. But if it's such a low percentage of people reporting it, then how can you say that it's scientific? Like no, but if it was something that happened to all of us, then at least you would have a much higher percentage of people reporting a white light with NDEs. But since they're saying it's so low, it actually works against their own argument that it's scientific. So I personally don't quite buy that. And I try to look at the picture of not just NDEs, but people that have actually died. Like we said, people that were expecting death. They've also reported seeing, white light right before they die, even people there in the room. So I'm just throwing that out there. If you all want to contribute to anything like that, you can.
One of my pet peeves with science is that when they can't explain something immediately, they'll often pull something out of their butt. And then, with the authority that they have a PhD, you now have to take it as fact. The what you're talking about there is they've had brain surgeons with people fully awake in their surgery have their skull opened up, and they'll take a prod and they'll poke at the brain meat, and people will start to describe the white light, and they figure that that's what it is. That's There's something going on chemically in the brain that makes that white light. However, they have yet to explain the evolutionary necessity of having such a thing. Our
Right.
biology is based off of evolution, and everything that we are biologically came about because it was evolutionary necessary to the perpetuation of the species. The white light at death has nothing to do with the perpetuation of the species. Yet this is somehow considered to be the scientific fact of why the white light thing happens. Science does this all the time with dark energy and dark matter. They these things don't really exist. That's what they're looking for with all these telescopes is the dark matter, because somebody on a whiteboard somewhere tried to figure out the totality of the mass of the universe, and their math didn't come out right. So they had to invent additional mass in order to make their numbers come out right. And they just, well, that's dark matter. We'll just call that dark matter. And they figured that that would actually solve the problem. It's a to be named later something something. So they have to go out and try and find it now to prove that their math was right, when actually all we're spending billions of dollars on is trying to cover a rounding error. It's Science does this all the time, and eventually they come back and say, "Yeah, we were wrong. Sorry, we spent all that money, but now we know."
Right.
The
Well,
same thing with the death.
and I also want to preface it to everybody too, or at least tell them right now that look, when I talk about people being visited by, deceased relatives or angels, things like that, keep in mind I'm not trying to fit this into a narrative. Okay. This is just based on literally stories of people that died or NDEs, that combination of things. When you look at enough of those stories over all of us here, we have a combined total over 100 years experience on this panel. Okay. So when you look at all of that and the stories and the research and all that stuff, that's what we're talking about. Now, yes, sometimes it might fit into maybe a certain religion or certain, hey, that's fine because maybe that is truth. You know, I just want to let everybody know watching that look, this isn't like we're not trying to just pigeonhole everything into a nice little package on something. This is we're just purely talking about things that we see. Now I will say if it's an opinion or not usually, but so
I'll give you something that our team. I've got a spiritual warfare team that we deal with, and this I don't know if y'all ever really heard this or not, and if let me know if you've heard it. So, kind of talking about dealing with mediums in real life, live mediums, and people are able to see. I've actually seen, believe this or not, people call me crazy. I've actually seen several portals kind of manifest and open up, and there are white shafts of light that comes through that. So one of the things that you was talking about the low number of people seeing those things. Well, imagine if you waking up in a room that you've never been before. You've died, but you're waking up in this afterlife, and now you're seeing spiritual things on a much clearer. Though you're confused and dazed, you may actually be seeing a portal, and you don't even know what it is. So I think that, it's kind of what we talked about with some of the NDAs that we've dealt with, and some of the stuff that's happened after that. With those same folks. One of the people that talked to us about, we pretty much figured that a lot of stuff that they were encountering in the paranormal realm was because of that near death experience and what they seen in that spiritual world. And so I wouldn't put it. I mean, this again is speculation. I'm not coming that from the Bible point of view. That's Sean Carter here, so I don't know if y'all have ever heard anything like that or not. So
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at NDEs, there's some people that will, when they talk about their experience, sometimes they're going directly to the next step. Some, they don't talk about the white light. Some people, and there is actually quite a few that talk about not going up anywhere. And some of them talk about going down some places, to some dark, scary places that they talk about, and then they get to come back. So I want to say, like, that's another thing that we haven't necessarily dove into yet, which I was kind of waiting for this opportunity, was there is people that have clinically died and went to hell. Okay. So, and they were basically sort of scared, and they came back and they changed. They changed their ways pretty damn quick. So yeah, I don't think that everybody's going to get the white light. Um, or like you said, they may interpret it different, or they may not even be thinking about that part of it. They may have missed that part and have cognitively kind of came to afterwards, or whatever the case is. So, I just wanted to offer a theory on the white light, right? And based on the people that do talk about it. So what do you
What I
guys
want
think
to
about?
know, what I want to know is how do you get on Sean's spiritual warfare team?
Right?
What do you got
I
to
don't
do?
know.
Is it like SEAL Team 6 kind of stuff?
No, basically just be local and be able to meet with me and others that we keep each other, we train each other, and we keep each other in check. It's not so much that I lead it. It's just we get together. We when we got a case we don't understand. It's about 4 or 5 of us pastors, and some are lay people, and we just get together and kick around ideas. Hey, what's going on with this? Why is this happening? We're dealing with this situation. How do we deal with it? But pretty much be local and just be willing to be teachable. So, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Like be a fly on the wall with that group.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some discussions, I will tell you that. But
How about I take this in a completely different direction? Just because I'm good at throwing weird stuff out there or off the wall or not commonly talked about, right? So I agree with everything we've been talking about. It all makes sense. It all fits. But, last week we were talking a little bit about the soul and the spirit, consciousness, all these different things, right? Well, what about the idea that potentially the white light is actually the severing of the soul and consciousness? And they're moving into separate directions, right? The soul is moving on to heaven or hell, and the consciousness is moving into that quantum dimensional plane, if that makes sense. Because there's a lot of talk about like ancestral knowledge that is not necessarily tied to our biology, right? There's biological evolution, but there's also like a psychological evolution that happens as well. We talk about generational baggage from our parents or our grandparents, things like that. Um, so, what if that white light happens from that separation? And that's what people are talking about crossing over. That maybe that's why some people who have experienced a near-death experience, they never had full separation, so they never saw the light.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but that may not account for the people that did see it, though, and they, you know, still weren't separated. So, but yeah, I mean, there's still a possibility the white light could be something like that. Could not be. It may not be a portal, but could be part of the process and just in that separation process or something like that too.
Yeah, but then there's the
Well,
other
when
idea that maybe it is a portal, right? And when that separation happens, it's a portal to that next dimension, right? They talk about how, with the idea of reincarnation, that you go through multiple lifetimes until you've completed your life cycle of lives. At the end, what happens? So maybe the ones that don't see the white light just solely move on because they're done. They've completed their path, right? Whether they just no longer exist through termination of that path, or they've completed all their lives and their goal, their purpose, and now they're moving on. And they wouldn't see that necessarily because the consciousness then would go with it. Just a thought, just a weird random thought in my head.
That's what we're here for, is all the fun, weird, random thoughts.
Well, I think you're onto something with the quantum field, because even I personally experienced with out of body experiences and with lucid dreaming, uh, leaving my body, my perception, my eyes aren't forward thinking or forward making. It's 360. I can see the entire room at the same time, like a pigeon. It's literally 360, but everything is far more brilliant. I'm colorblind, so I only see limited colors to begin with, and then when I'm out, everything is really, really vivid as far as the colors are concerned. The spectrum of perception is amplified, and if the quantum field is what the soul is basically riding like a slipstream, that it would represent itself in light, a very brilliant light at that. It may not be a portal necessarily, but more like a railroad track where you're, sucked in and you're just riding the gravity wave of whatever the quantum field actually, is pointed at. And it looks like it's a portal from your perspective, but that can be the same way with a train going through a tunnel too.
Yeah. Well, and that's the one. There could be white light for different things, like when you astral project, or when you travel through things or go through a portal. When you're dying, like the white light could just be that your consciousness sort of having to make that blank adjustment to the transition of, like, going from one plane to another through a portal, or when you spiritually, remove yourself from your astral projecting or something, you may experience a white light and things like that too. It's possible.
Well, one of the things they don't talk about, which I always thought was interesting, whenever you have an out of body experience, you can the spirit and the body are actually held together with almost like a webbing of tendons. It keeps you tethered to this body, and when you go out of body, those things break. They they're like rubber bands, but they break, and it literally sounds like two by fours snapping, or a baseball bat crack, and you hear it crack, 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 and sometimes it can be jarring enough to where you actually snap out of it because you think somebody's trying to break into your house, kicking in the front door. That's literally happened to me. I thought somebody was trying to break in, and I was in the process of going out of body. But when you allow it to do that, that sound is almost deafening. You don't hear that with people who are dying. They don't talk about this loud cracking sound, the snapping sound. It just they slip into it. It just goes. I don't know what the process is with all of that, but I always thought that was interesting, the difference between the out of body and the actual NDE.
Well, and yeah, the NDE, it's like, because I think when they clinically die, I think your physical body loses all of that auditory, sensory, input. So, that's probably why they don't report it, because they're dead. Like, they physically are not nothing. But in like, say, your case, like if you were starting to spiritually leave your body, you're hearing it because you are alive. You have those inputs.
I
Your
don't think
brain
it's
functions on that sense. I mean, like,
I
this
don't
is a
think
theory.
it's physical though. I don't think it's physical. It's because you
Well, I'm saying your brain can interpret, though, whatever's going on, to where you're hearing those snapping two by fours, whether it's not literally audible. But I'm just saying, I think maybe with you being alive and the neurons firing in your brain can you know uh, can formulate that, can make that happen. Versus when when you're dead or clinically dead, there's nothing to formulate that, so to speak. Does that make sense? I'm trying to make that make sense, but
Yeah, and there's always one tether too. When you go out of body, there's still a tether. It looks like
the silver thread or whatever they say.
a, a spider web. Yeah, silver thread. It looks like a spider web thread that just kind of keeps going with you. It's the first time you see it, you think it's kind of cool. It's kind of like this one of these strings. It just keeps going and going and going, and you can essentially go anywhere you want as long as you don't break the thread itself, because that's what brings you back, and it brings you back jarringly most of the time, like whiplash. So
All right, so let's while we're in the back half of the podcast, let's kind of start moving into the unexpected death. And let's kind of talk a little bit about unexpected death when people suddenly, this could be they, pull out in front of a semi and didn't even know, and next thing you know, they're dead. Um, Now, I will say that I personally believe that this is where we can get spirits lingering in between. I think whether they have finished business or they resist the light. I think sometimes spirits will find themselves suddenly deceased. They don't understand. They're getting pulled toward the light, and some of them resist for whatever reason, but they're able to manifest their energy enough to get away from the light, and they resist for a little bit. I think eventually they will have a point, whether it's unfinished business or they finally accept it, and then the door will reopen for them someday. But I think that somewhere in that transition, when they suddenly die, there seems to be a higher percentage, because it seems like a lot of the spirits that I've interacted with seem to usually be sudden death, so to speak. They weren't expecting to die. So I would just say that on average, it seems that the people that have a sudden death are somehow the ones that are avoiding the light, so to speak. And, there's a higher percentage, anyways.
I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily true. Like my grandmother, she knew her time was coming. Um, and she, as much as we don't know the hour of our death, we don't know for sure. I think that we do have still free will, right? And I know people talk about the gravitational pull, but you have the choice to fight against it or to go with it. When my grandmother was passing, she held on, waiting for a specific child to show up, and then was gone within minutes. And it happens over and over and over again. Her passing was no surprise. We all knew it was coming. We all expected it within the day or so. But she waited until that one child showed up, and then she was gone. So, when we talk about sudden death or near death experiences, um, I don't know. Like, it seems like we often forget about the idea of free will, right? And sometimes we don't have control of that. Sometimes we are just we're gone. Yeah, our time is up. Our number's been punched. But I think there are other times too where it's like, well, no, we're not quite there yet. And I think the difference is that in expected, they can like fight it off until they see that child or something of that nature. But I also think that in in a sudden situation, they'd be more likely to because they didn't have preparation or they didn't have their goodbyes. They didn't have their answers. They didn't have that time to complete those things,
Right.
even with some prep work, right? Um, but I think the idea of free will, God gave it to us for this entire life and eternity, and here we are saying that we don't have a choice. We're just getting sucked in by the gravitation and sucked through the white light, you know. So
Well,
I think
let's
that's,
clarify. I didn't say that.
well, no, but a lot of people do, and it's
No,
a
right, right.
common topic.
And that's why I was talking about percentages, right? Like, yes, I think that people that expected to die, I think there's a percentage that it's probably very low that of people that have fought it the whole way, even knowing they're dying, even getting the preparation, getting visited. They're just like, nope, nope, I'm not doing it. I'm not dying. Nope. And they fight it all the way. And their spirit may linger around after that. Also, they may fight it. But I think it's a much lower percentage versus the sudden death where yes, they're like, whoa, I did not expect this. This is bull. This is BS. And I am not going into no light right now, or they could be afraid of judgment, whatever, who knows? But yeah, but I think it's a higher percentage is what I'm saying. That's all I was saying. Like, I think it's a higher percentage.
Well, from my religious perspective, there is no sudden death necessarily. The idea that we have so many heartbeats, we know that before we even start. We know how many heartbeats we're going to have. We choose the life that we have as a challenge to learn something specific in that lifetime. It's sort of a, you know, get on a ride. You know what the ride's going to do. You just don't know how it's going to feel or how you're going to react on the ride. You just have to kind of like go with it. But you know the ride's going to end, and when it does, your task, your lesson, your mission has been accomplished. Now, if it hasn't been accomplished, I think that's where you start seeing your NDEs, people who got into a situation that they didn't mean to, and suddenly they're on the other side, and the other side is saying, "Hey, it's not your time yet. You need to go back because the mission has not been fulfilled. What they needed to do is still incomplete, and in order for them to complete it, they have to go back." When you do complete whatever mission it is that you chose when you entered this life, when you die, that mission is complete, and that's how you know you graduate. Just like
I still think there's sudden death. I mean, because
for you,
if I step out in front of a semi and I didn't even know that was happening, you know, that's sudden. And
well,
if I use my free will to not look both ways before crossing the street, and I was like, hey, I'm just going to cross the street without looking, and I get hit by a semi, that's sudden. I'm not
yeah, but
expecting
you're
that
also prepped.
at all. I didn't feel any destiny like, hey, someday I'm going to be hit by a semi. No, so I would just say that's just my take on that is I still feel like, yeah. And I agree. I think there could be some destiny and maybe we all like sometimes we make a free will choice. It doesn't go the right way and we get sent back. Like, okay, hey, you have one more chance. You didn't mess up your body too bad. The doctors are working on it. We're sending you back. This time don't screw up. Okay. But I think that like there with because we have free will, you can end up making the wrong sudden choice, and and you may leave without fulfilling your destiny.
And then it comes down to what is free will. If you're distracted all the time because you're trying to do so many other things, it's easy to step on a landmine because you're not paying attention because you're doing so many other things. You didn't intentionally step on the landline, but you intentionally stepped on the landline
She didn't
because
expect it.
yeah, well, because you weren't thinking, you weren't prepared, you weren't cognitive, and if you're not cognitive, do you have free will?
Yeah, I was just gonna say we've now entered the argument of free will versus karma.
Yeah, well,
Right. Well, I mean, and like I said, I just think that look, I agree with a lot of what you're saying in some sense of purpose. But I do think that because we have free will, I do think that yes, there is some choices we make that, oops, we let ourselves down the wrong path, and sometimes that could be our destiny. Who knows? And maybe like that's the something I think we'll determine when we die, and we get up to wherever we go, and somebody probably is going to say, that was your destiny, man. Sorry, but you made those series of choices, and that's your destiny. Or they might say, yeah, you get to go back real quick. Or, like we talked about last week with some reincarnation possibilities, they might say, hey, you're going to go do it all over again. If you want, you can go do it all over again. There you go. You can go back. So,
Now I want to have a conversation about the similarities between near death experiences and unexpected death. What are those? Those are those paths very similar? I mean, obviously, when somebody dies unexpectedly, unless you're a medium, you have access to no information about what happens in a sudden death
well,
experience because they're not coming back to tell us, like in a near
most
death
NDEs
experience.
are sudden deaths, are unexpected because they're, again, they didn't expect to die and they had like a sudden heart attack or an accident or whatever, and then they come back, after being saved on the table.
Right, but that's where we get the information from is when they come back. But what about those who die in an accident suddenly or have a widowmaker? You know, we aren't getting those answers from them to see what they experienced to be able to compare it with those who have reported what they experienced with their near death experience. Right?
That's what I was
I'd
saying at the
like to
beginning. They're very
understand
coy.
and explore that.
The dead are very coy on what it is that they experience, even if you try and pry it out of them in a séance or through a medium, even through voice recorders.
Yeah.
The EVPs. They're usually very succinct with two or three words, maybe, of what it is that they went through. They're very coy, and uh, a lot of times it's vastly different from one to the next. So
I
it's
think we might find some more commonalities if we start looking into some of the things such as the preparation and reports of what people were experiencing leading up to this sudden event. And maybe, like we were talking about, maybe it's not so sudden. Maybe it's just not the way we thought.
Yeah, I mean there is been discussion about, not so much us, but in some books and things about signs, right?
Mhm.
Signs that something tragic was going to happen to yourself in that life. And sometimes I think there has been some NDEs on. I remember a few of the stories I've read on some NDEs where they did talk about in hindsight that they did have certain signs that they thought were like, well, looking back on it, I remember there was one day when I just kept seeing a bunch of things saying, don't ride your motorcycle. And then I rode my motorcycle and I got hit by a semi. But yeah, so but there has been some of that. So I think, Jen, I think you bring up a great point, and I think that maybe if there's a way to gather even more of that evidence of those NDEs of prior things, if they can think back, but I don't know if that would be confirmation bias at that point, because then when you just ask them after the fact, they might start going back and saying, well, yeah, this could have been a sign here, and they might start stretching a lot of things into that. So, but that's a good idea.
Well, yeah, but there might be a number of people who have, video diaries or written diaries that where they're talking about things that they're doing leading up to it that might be, you know, in the moment records that we could use to start investigating some of that and find out if there is a connection there.
Yeah, yeah. There is actually several books with NDE, things like that. You can find a lot of testimonials online as well. The information's out there for sure. I had to do a lot of studying for that and read a lot of NDE stuff. I always was fascinated by some of that. So that's why it is a subject near and dear to me as well.
Did you
But
happen to see back when the lockdowns were happening? A lot of these videos that I'm going to talk about were coming out of Asia during the height of the COVID, and China lost a lot of people during COVID. But they had these security cameras. They would catch people and they would just start looking up and then around, and then they'd start swatting at stuff, spinning because they thought they were being surrounded by a buzzard or a flying monkey or something, and they'd try and fight it off, and then they just drop dead. They had a whole bunch of these videos that were going on during the lockdowns that people were suddenly being snatched while they were walking down the street. Sudden, that if you want to talk about sudden death, that would definitely be one when it's not even provoked, being caught on camera.
I think there's something to be said too about people not wanting to share those things, though, because I think there's a lot of things that get lost because they're afraid that if they share it, it's going to like jinx them or something. It's like superstition, right? Because I could even share something today, but I am like nervous to say anything because I don't want something to happen to me, and they're going to be like, "Dude, he said the thing."
Self prophecy, yeah, self prophecy,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a buzzard, a vulture, actually buzz my truck today while I was sitting in it. It just like went right across the roof of my thing. It was like, phew. I was like, oh my God, what the hell? It was huge. And then it like glided around and made another pass. And like, as I was backing out, it came right toward me and like right at my windshield and like veered off at the last second. I'm like, why is this buzzard being weird?
He was trying to eat the squirrel you hit the other day.
Maybe. But I saw the squirrel in my rear view mirror, so I didn't keep him on my tire. I don't know, but who knows? I mean, I hope that's not a sign. But no, I mean, there could be signs that people just didn't want to share because of superstition, and they're like, I don't want to say anything, and then they pass away, and nobody knows. They're just lost to that individual.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely take work to find people who are willing to talk about it and willing to kind of open themselves up to share. But I mean, there's people that donate their bodies to science, so you know, um, I'm
Yeah,
sure there would be some willing candidates out there to help further the study.
and I think too it would be have somebody that would have to go through and just read a ton of the NDEs, like I said, because there is talk of previous signs in some of these NDE cases. It would probably be more of a matter of somebody taking the time to document those and say, okay, well, in all of these cases that do talk about signs, what are some commonalities, or like just document them, and then going back and re-interviewing the people that don't talk about signs and maybe asking them, hey, by the way, you shared your near death experience, right? So, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you, can you think back? Were there any signs or something that was telling you? I mean, you probably would have to just reopen the research yourself and document the ones that did talk about it, and then start contacting the ones that did and see what they said.
Well, Madame Curie documented her whole death when she exposed herself to a fatal dose of radiation. She at Once she got dosed, and she knew she got dosed, she made it a point to document essentially every hour of the rest of her life of what she was experiencing and what the physical problems were and what the mental issues were. And towards the end, she was seeing stuff, and it got documented. She had a secretary write everything down. It's fascinating stuff. But people chalk it up to being somebody who's nuclear microwaved and delusional with basically a cooked brain by the time that she was dying. And it turns out that that's her experience wasn't unique. It's just she was the most documented when it happened.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you hear a lot too about, like these hallucination states that people get in closer to death. And, people in the medical field a lot of times will talk about how this is caused by the slowdown of the heart rate and the lower levels of oxygen that are in the blood and the blood flow going to the brain. And this is all a biological sign that people are seeing these things. But they also can't explain why they're seeing family members
Hmm.
and dear friends and angels instead of other things. They can't explain the why of the exactness of it, the intentionality behind it, besides to say, oh, well, they missed them. Well, yeah, but they missed them yesterday too, and they weren't like this yesterday. They weren't seeing them yesterday. So, there could be some biological science behind it, but there could also be a whole heck of a lot of the spirituality behind it as well.
Yeah.
And maybe that lower biological rate, heart rate, blood flow, oxygen level, all those things, maybe that has something to do with opening up. Because when you talk about meditation and grounding, you're lowering your heart rate, you're slowing your breathing, you're lowering all those levels within your
Mhm.
system, right? And then you're more open. So maybe it's the same thing.
Now,
The evolutionary imperative too. What's the evolutionary imperative to have the brain dump all of these chemicals like DMT into your system right when you're dying? The If you're going to go with an evolutionary theory, you have to have an evolutionary, you know, reason for something to take place, because that's what science is. That's what biology is. They look at the evolutionary imperative of everything that goes on in the body, and this doesn't, and they can't explain it, so they just pull stuff out of their butt saying, well, this is what it is, and expect you to just go with that. It's like, no, you have to explain yourself. They don't.
so for those of you watching that want a more scientific explanation of life after death, you could really like take what even Stacy's talking about. Like, so let's just say, for the argument's sake, that there was no spiritual world afterwards and it was only energy, right? Let's just look at energy, because this is actually talked about in the scientific community, was that energy can stay indefinite, right? So the evolutionary side of it would be like your body, your will to live can surpass the physical part by becoming energy, evolving to and retaining its energy status into that energy world afterwards, right? So that could be an explanation of, if you wanted to go without spiritual part of it, I guess, and you wanted to go with like an evolutionary part where your body is saying, hey, it needs to live, it wants to live, and it's there's a reason for everything it does, and out of soul survival of extending its life and knowing that its physical part is done, then it could extend that into the past, into the energy world. But I personally am more of a spiritual person. And so I'm going to go with Jesus on this one. So that's just me. But any other last thoughts as we start to wrap this up, guys?
There's so many more directions and so many more rabbit trails we could go down with this one. But
I
I
know.
mean, I'm glad we touched on a lot more tonight.
Oh yeah, like I said, that's when we talked about reincarnation last week, like just the actual process of death and the ideas that we went through tonight. Like I said, I knew it would be a whole nother episode, and yeah, we could probably even get into even more of the energy world and things like that. That even we I just brought up in the end, like along with Stacy was talking about some things too. So
I was gonna say, didn't we call this episode Life After Death? And we talked about the entire death process and nothing after the fact?
yeah, that's true. So we may have to do more follow up on this. Of course, guys, if you watch this series, we are going to come back to a lot of these topics. They're all going to interchange with each other, most likely, because again, it's all part of the same process, right? Spirits, ghosts, life, death, reincarnation, all these topics. We're going to get into a lot more. So, guys, we will see you. Oh, before I wrap up, I wanted to hear from either Stacey or Sean as well. Do you guys have any last minute thoughts?
I just think that we just need to be prepared, looking at our own life and looking at not just the signs, but how we're treating our fellow human beings around us, how we are encountering the choices that we make. I think that's just important. But I'll let Stacy have the last thing.
Yeah, Sean's right. It's what you do to and for other people is what's really important in this life. It's not what you do for yourself. It's not all about you. You are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It is a pay it forward kind of world, universe. What you do for others to help them in their mission gives you extra stuff, gives you extra oomph, and you um, really become more than what you even think yourself can be. It's just, it's not about the ego. It's not about the narcissism, which is, hard to come by given social media is all it is nowadays. People are, you know, it's a fetish, and it's really kind of gross. You got to do things for others. Sean's right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I have this saying, right? And I talk about it when people talk about death and passing and moving on, is at the end of your life here on earth, you will not regret the things that you did. So even if you make mistakes, forgive yourself. But it is the things that you did not do that you regret. The not helping somebody, not repairing that relationship, not helping with that project, not going back to school and learning more and giving more and being more. Those are the things that are so important at the end of this life when you look back on it. So, like I said, it's not the things that you regret at the end of your life that you did, it's the things you didn't do that you regret. So you live your life to your best every day.
Get that
Yeah.
bucket list.
Yeah, like going to In and Out Burger.
Or throwing Stacy out of a plane with a parachute, if we're nice.
Or you just like throw them out of the plane with but we throw the parachute separate and let them try to skydive to it, and
Well,
Stacy
where did this come
totally
from?
get it.
I don't even know where we're going with this. All right, guys,
It's glad it wasn't me.
great stream, guys. Thank you for all watching, and hope you tune in for next week. So we'll see you then.
Peace.